about your book on the backdrop of, what's going on with Juneteenth. So let me ask you, when and how, did you learn about Juneteenth? Was it something that your family celebrated, observed?
Well, actually, no. And I've been trying to remember whether I'm actually from North Carolina. And I do remember us maybe celebrating Emancipation Day or the Emancipation Proclamation as, like on January 1st, not necessarily mixed up with New Year's Day or anything like that. But it seemed to me in school, we did have an observance of the Emancipation Proclamation. I was familiar with that, but I really was not familiar with Juneteenth until I came to California, and several years after that. As you know, I live in Santa Barbara, and shortly after I moved here in 1986, the first year that we celebrated the Martin Luther King holiday, we formed a Martin Luther King committee as a year-round arts presenting nonprofit. And so we just put on events that had to do with African-American culture year-round. And so one of our members in 1989 said, why don't we have a Juneteenth? Well, I had heard about Juneteenth by then because lots of people from Santa Barbara have their roots in, and a lot of people in California have their roots in Texas. And so certainly I had heard of it and perhaps had been to a backyard party or something. And she said, why don't we put on a Juneteenth? So we did that for one of the local parks. And my friend, Maddie Brewer, who is, actually the book is one of the two women I dedicated it to, who was from, believe it or not, Uvalde, Texas, lived here. Now she lives in San Antonio. Anyway, Maddie said, why don't we put on a Juneteenth? And I was the staff member for the MLK organization. And so I had to organize it. I had to find out what it was. I did research, and because I knew quite a few people would ask me, Juneteenth, what is that? I did research and sort of pulled up what I could and put together a little fact sheet about Juneteenth, which I handed out or had distributed at our Juneteenth event at the park. So that was in 1989. And then in 1983, I was involved with another artist who happened to be from Texas. And I also was doing a television show at the time. And so I invited her, and she, as a part of her sort of art study that she was doing, her business study, she wanted to have a Juneteenth. And so I interviewed her and another woman from Oxnard, that's not too far from Santa Barbara, you may know that, on my television show, which was on public access. And they both are from the region where Juneteenth, we're near Galveston, but it's something they call Comanche Creek. There was different other little towns around Galveston that they actually were naming about where they were from. And so they talked about Juneteenth, and that video interview with them actually is still online in the Internet Archive. But so that was my second experience with organizing and being a part of a Juneteenth, because I was a part of the art group that Yvette Sutton was a part of, and she was the one who pulled together the Juneteenth. So that was 1993. So then fast forward to 2004, the second person that I dedicated the book to was Mrs. Valencia King Nelson. And she by then had moved from Santa Barbara and lived in Anniston, Alabama, and had started an online genealogical program, which had as a component of it Afrogenius magazine. And Afrogenius is still online. And in 2004, they decided they were going to do a special little story on Juneteenth. And she asked me to send her something because I had been contributing poetry like every month for the magazine. So I took my fact sheet and I made it into a poem. And I sent it to her, and they put it on that special page, and it's been online for 18 years, that same page. But it also has been replicated all over. So that's getting ahead of the story. You just asked me how I learned about Juneteenth. And so that was really my introduction to Juneteenth, learning about it so that I could teach the community about it, a community where many people already knew about it and many other people didn't. That was my impetus. And so it was online. People would write to me from all over. Can I use your poem in my blog? Can we use your poem in our program? You know, I got these kind of queries over the years. And I guess 2 years ago, in 2020, Sterling Books was looking for something. They were looking for diverse authors and look at diverse information. And I think they came up with looking for something about Juneteenth and discovered my poem online and wrote and asked me if I would be interested in it being the children's illustrated book, an illustrated children's book. And after a little bit of consideration, I said yes. And so it's been a 2-year process, and here it comes. And it was already almost completed by the time the national holiday came up last year on such short notice. It was already in progress. And so it's just come out in May. And here we are with the first national holiday and my book going all over the place.
Perfect timing.
Yeah, I say it's beyond me, you know. It's one of those things where you say, not necessarily from me, but through me. So I just give thanks for my presence in this whole glorious process.
And you mentioned Dr. King, and obviously, yes, you know, the book is titled Free at Last.
Yes.
That, you know, that automatic free at, you know, the speech, you know, free at last, free at last. Thank God Almighty, we are free at last. So it definitely evokes, you know, thoughts of, you know, our experience.
Originally named the poem Free at Last. I resonate with Dr. King, and I've been involved with efforts to uphold Dr. King and his name and his work for all of the years. Actually, since he was assassinated, I've worked for SCLC when I lived in New York. And so I've been associated with Dr. King in many ways over these many years. However, when I named the poem that, I didn't really think about how ubiquitous that title is. And now, you know, if you Google Free at Last as the title, you get many, like I'd say, you know, hundreds of references to it as a title that people have used for their speeches, for stories about Dr. King. He still has the dominant presence for that phrase. And I thought, oh, well, you know, it is what it is. That's what I named the poem at that moment, not thinking it would come to this universal sort of presence along. However, and it's in the book. I use it in the book. And an interesting little story is that after the book came out a couple of weeks ago, my niece's dad called with them, and they had just gotten the book in the mail and read the book, and they're 8 years old. And I asked them what was their favorite verse in the book, and that's what they said, the very last page. Free, when their ancestors could sing, free at last, hallelujah, I'm free at last.
So could I ask, when you were coming up, growing up, were there a lot of, you know, books that spoke to the African-American experience?
Not really, you know. I think I had the standard, you know, Dick and Jane and that kind of thing. Not very much. However, I did. I lived most of my elementary grades. I lived with my grandmother, and my grandmother was, among other things, a church woman, and so I was, you know, Sunday school. I had a big part in that, oratorical contest, etc. And so I did have exposure to poems and poetry because there were two women in our church that used to, as they say, bring the poem. And so always with somebody. And so I think that's what I grew up to be, is a person who brought the poem. And of course, they would use a lot of biblical references and poems like James Weldon Johnson. And so I had an exposure to what Black literature there was. But in terms of, you know, going to the library, no, we couldn't have a library card. I didn't get a library card in my hometown until I went back as an adult. You know, I was raised in the Jim Crow South, like many of us were. And when I was 11 years old, my aunt, who had recently finished college, bought an encyclopedia, a set of encyclopedias, and it was a children's set with it. It was like Britannica or Americana, something like that. And so there were volumes in that set of children's books that she gave to me when she bought the encyclopedia set. And so I read just about every volume. And so I got stories, mythology, and some of them had an African base. But I would say that no, I didn't have a lot of exposure the way children do now. You know, there's lots of stories now, but there wasn't very much back then. We heard stories, and we read biblical stories, and we were living the Black experience, and so what there was passed down to us. Yeah.
And obviously, you know, and being a writer myself, but literacy is a form of freedom. As you know, I mean, there was a time, as you said, you know, the time when you couldn't even get a library card. There were times when we weren't allowed to read, to learn how to read, learn how to write, those things. Can you talk a little bit about the freedom that reading literacy provides?
Yes. Oh, yes, for sure. So I read everything I could get my hands on. You know, my grandmother used to say they couldn't find me. She's probably somewhere with her head stuck in a book. And we had books around the house, but they were mostly adult books because my aunts, my father's sisters at that time, one after the other were in college. And so their college textbooks were around the house. So I read stuff that I couldn't even understand, but fully.
So, yeah.
But I was an avid reader, and I worked in libraries most of my adult life. And my first job, I would say my first real job out of high school was at the New York Public Library. And so I've been associated with libraries everywhere I went, everywhere I've lived. And even now, I do a lot of work with our local libraries, and mostly I am a professional classroom guest. And so going into the classrooms to teach poetry or to teach about Black History Month or Kwanzaa or anything that comes up that is related to the African American experience, that's kind of what I do in my community.
Wonderful. Do you see, you know, with the holiday, with books like yours, that there'll be a greater understanding of the Black experience, Juneteenth, and ethnic observances will bring about a better understanding of our experience here?
Most certainly. I think that the holiday, I mean, so many people now, I mean, I can just see from the reaction to my book, there's been reviews all over, and, you know, I went to speak at the Texas Librarians Association. Of course, Texas is like deep in the heart of Texas. I mean, you know, and most of the people who came to get their books, their pre-copies signed and to interact about the books, most of them were not Black. You know, the majority of the people at the conference were not Black, but they recognize that they have a responsibility as well as a deep interest in having literature that they can use to teach to the younger people. But just broader than that, I think the interest there. Well, first, there's several things that underpin that. First of all, I think America is shocked when Juneteenth became a national holiday. I think maybe some years before then. But they were shocked that there was something that in general Americans didn't know about. And so I think that the people who feel like they need to know and want to know, a lot of people in blended families, you know, they've got grandkids, they just want to know more about this. This is becoming a national phenomenon. And I've had queries from people from other countries as well. You know, last year, a couple of years ago, I started having queries from people from Australia, Berlin, Poland. I mentioned it a little bit in the book, but I started getting queries from people all over. And I know that here at our university, in our African American Studies, Black Studies department, we've had more and more people of other cultures come to major in Black Studies. So I know there's a deep interest in it all over, and I think this is what you would say I don't want to use a word that gets misconstrued, but I think that people just know the lack of depth that they have in understanding the Black experience. And many people operate on, of course, we always know on stereotypes, and we've had this great pushback on learning more about the experience of enslaved people. And I think that leads to not only the fact that America has to wake up to the true historical experience of African Americans and people of the African diaspora. They've got to wake up to the fact that people all over the world, as one of my people who came by my book signing a couple of weeks ago, people all over the world are in search of freedom. And I think that our experience and what has happened in our journey in 400 years since the Emancipation Proclamation, I think that it is something that is a torch, a candle, a light, a way, a reflection on what can happen for people who still feel that they live in a very oppressed and somewhat slave-like existence.
Mm-hmm. In terms of, the education piece, and, this is children's book. Can you tell me, it's a picture book, what ages, obviously, early readers, or, what you tell me?
Well, it was published for, the recommended age is 4 to 8. And, but I tell you that the first thing is the grandmother factor. All right. So as soon as people learn about the book, most of my friends, because I'm an older woman and many of my friends are grandmothers. So they right away want to get the book to read for their grandkids. Beautiful. And to read to their grandkids. And secondly, I think it was not written as the poem was not written for children. Sure. It was just written as a general poem about the Juneteenth experience and what I imagined and what I could learn that people did when that day came, when that moment came. So it was never geared toward children, but it was always sort of thought that children could learn from hearing about it. Maybe the words were not words that they knew in terms of their reading experience. However, I have a couple of, I've written poems for children before. And one of the things that I feel is that that children, how children, if they have a favorite book, they'll have somebody read me this book over and over and over. And then pretty soon they know how to, they know what words are on each page, and they can, even if they can't technically read, mm-hmm. they can turn that page and say exactly what's on that page after somebody has read it to them several times or every night for 2 or 3 months or something. Yeah. And they can tell from the pictures what's going on that page. And then they can eventually read it themselves. And so I feel that a lot of my what I consider kind of children's poems and children's books or things in that direction, I feel that they are aids toward learning to read, especially if the adults or, their teachers or their brothers and sisters. I used to read to my little brother when he was about 4. If they learn how to read, and then the big words, because I learned the big words when I was a little girl. Mm-hmm. And like I say, I may not have known the full ramification of the word, but I think when I look back at the words in Free at Last, there are very few words there that children can't understand. So what they really most learn, I think, is what is the context of this? What were people being, there are things in there like in bondage, hands bound. Okay, so, well, why were their hands bound? I mean, it really takes that sort of interactive experience with young people. But I think the 8-year-olds, I say, are becoming my greatest fan club, because I'm starting to hear from the 8-year-olds. And I don't think it takes much, for them to say, what does this word mean, or what does that word mean, if it's a word beyond their experience. But it's really the story behind the day. Why did we have to have this day? Why did we need a day of emancipation, or for people to be able to be released to go? Learning that greater story, to me, is the real importance here, And of course, the illustrations, I can't be too astounded and pleased with the illustrations that interpret the poem in just such a beautiful way.
Yeah, and I would ask you that, how did that happen, and sort of, your pleasure, you've already, especially, and him getting it right.
Yes.
I've heard from a lot of children's writers, specifically, Black writers that work with, illustrators who aren't African American, wanting to make sure they're not caricatures,
yes.
They get our features and skin tones correctly.
Yes.
Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. Well, Alex Boston, I mean, I feel like I've been paired or blessed with a star. But the process for, because I knew from other books that I had been, hope that I get published and whatnot, people will always say, well, the company chooses the illustrator. You don't have anything to do with that. All companies do that. So whenever we embarked on this process, they told me that I would not have say over the illustrations, but that I could have input. That was it. And they sent me the names of three, or, sort of like some images and things from three different illustrators. And Alex, of course, stood out right away. And I wrote them right back and said, I choose Alex Bostic. And they said, we did too. And they said, but they told me he was known for his portraiture. And, you could see from the work that he had online, that he had a very definite and well, I don't know what words to use, impactful, but beautiful portraits of African-American people. I don't know that every illustration that he has is African-American, but a person of African descent, I'll just say that. And so that was right away. And then I watched a video that was about him, that he was on an illustrator's panel. And he was talking about his process for doing these illustrations. He says that this is only the second book that he's illustrated, and the first, and the other one, because most of his work is in another direction, but he's a painter. Anyway, he said that after he got the assignment, the poem, he studied the period, then he hired models and bought costumes and set up each scene. So I think there's 12 different paintings that are the pages of the book. Mm-hmm. And he pretty much set up a tableau and had that tableau with live models and period costumes photographed, and then he painted the tableau. And so it was just a miraculous thing. And then he worked with the art director, and I'm telling you, they were meticulous. They would send me a draft illustration, and I would give my feedback on it, and then they moved forward. And I can see a lot of the little bitty things, but that I just would say that the creative art team, the art director and the team were meticulous in terms of a lot of the details in the book that addressed just those issues that you were talking about. Whether it was the visual image or word usage or, contextual kind of ideas. And even my author's note in the back is reflective of, something that we wanted to direct for, and they particularly wanted to direct to teachers and adults looking at the book so that they would understand. Because there's so much around Juneteenth that, of course, there's an opportunity for many people to have their opinions. Some people say, well, they don't say, it doesn't go deep enough into the story of what slavery was about and stuff. Well, it wasn't intended for that. It was intended just to say, this is what happened on that day. And now here, 100 and almost 60 years, we celebrate that day. We celebrate that moment. And in my work, and I feel that it is symbolic of freedom. Movements and efforts, and all people strive for freedom. It is the symbolic praise of freedom and what people can do when they're free. Go where they want to go, do what they want to do, nothing if they don't want to, It is about the freedom to be free.
That part. Can you talk about the importance of Black children being able to pick up a book that, teaches them their own history? You touched on the critical race theory, fight, if
Yes.
that has taken place of late. But can you talk about, the importance of, and I've heard, both, when you talk about writers who say, hey, I would pick up a book and I didn't see, people that look like me or actors saying, hey, I didn't see people in roles that, look like me. So
Yes.
can you talk a little bit about the importance of having a book like Free at Last readily available to today's children?
Well, I certainly think that that is very, very important. And, and I've been on that track for a long time. I feel that we need to see ourselves reflected in our space, what it is. Just like if you want, I know I used to work in situations where most of the imagery around was around musicians. And so everybody wanted to be a musician because that was the popular thing. That's what they saw. That's what they saw. And therefore that was something that they felt they could achieve because they saw people who looked like them being that. Or, and we often say that we don't have scientists because our children don't see scientists in their environment, or, they become what their role models were. And I want to grow up and be like that. So you have to be able to imagine who it is that you are going to be when you grow up. You have to be able to have that vision in your head of something that you could aspire to. And I just feel that is so important psychologically for young kids. You can reach beyond, what you've been imbued with or what you've been impressed with. You can reach out and say, I want to see, can I find something different or something further? Or, there's just, if a child goes, it's like the black doll experiments they used to do, and have black children choosing black dolls because those were the items that they were taught was the beautiful, and they didn't see beautiful dolls, the white dolls. They would choose the white dolls because they didn't see beautiful black dolls. And so it, psychologically, I'm sure there are books and books written on how important this is to be able to see yourself growing up in your own image, seeing yourself in the mirror and being able to see that mirror image reflected in your society is so important. And the people who have kept us from that, who have never thought it was important, never thought that they would make any money from it, or never thought that they would, that they even wanted us to have a positive image of ourselves, other than the stereotypes and the caricatures that were put out there. For some people that was intentional, for some people that was just ignorance, because they were steeped in their own image. And so they thought their own image was the image that everybody else should aspire to. I'm not an expert on that particular area, but I have my opinions about it. And I've been living a long time, so I value what I have learned in my life, and I try my best to reflect that, to replicate that, to share that, and to help raise others up with an idea about it. So as you can tell, I like to get on my little soapbox.
That's okay. And you talked about being a classroom guest, and the book just came out as school was sort of dwindling down. But are you going to have opportunity to, what's the promotion been like, in this pandemic kind of world that we still live in?
Well, in this time, that reality part of the of promotion hasn't happened, but I look forward to it happening. I've had, teachers come to my signing to make sure they get a book. Teachers tell me that they're gonna, like, even at the college level, tell me they're adding it to their curriculum in the fall. So I don't think that the fact that it's a children's book or book designed for children is going to limit. And of course, the publishing company, their major thrust to me in terms of preliminary work and stuff like that has been targeted towards schools and libraries, and some like School Library Journal and the book list, and some really top reviews have come from entities that are specifically geared toward children. So their promotion has been excellent. And I doubt if there's, it was in all the spring catalogs, and there's just been review after review from both bloggers and different people that write things. I've just been overwhelmed, so much so that I haven't been able to keep up with all of it, all of the different reviews. So I think that the word is out there really probably as much as any book that's out there. And, in conjunction with the Juneteenth holiday. I do have my first gig, not with in the classroom, but with the summer program for classroom teachers. So I'm going to be doing a workshop this summer for teachers, and to me that's good. And then I don't doubt that maybe not so much in the fall, but as next Juneteenth is about to approach, I'll probably start to get. But I haven't been doing any classroom guest visits during the pandemic. And not even virtually, but I have been speaking with a lot of other groups, and so I'm thinking that next year that my Juneteenth book and presence in the classrooms will be a lot greater. Yeah.
Do you have a follow-up project? Are there more books to come?
Well, I call myself that I consider my genre of poetry writing as the one. I consider myself a public poet. And so, and then the second is I write a lot of poems that are historical narrative, of which I think that the Juneteenth poem is an example of the kind of poems I like to write. And then I tend to present them at some group. I tend to be like more of an assembly reader or public events, etc. I'll read a poem to open the event, that kind of thing. So I have a few poems that I'm really wanting to, but the last 2 years, my work, my poems that I have written have had more to do with atrocities that have occurred in the lives of our children. So I've written 4 poems that have to do with, that touch upon the shootings that have happened over the past couple of years. And I wrote a poem last year, which is the one that I am putting forward right now. I just had a poster made from it. It's called I Stand to Keep Hope Alive, and it was a poem that I started writing after the death of John Lewis, and it quotes both John Lewis and Dr. King as the epigrams for the poem, and it's based on John Lewis's last instruction, which never lose that sense of hope. And so, no matter how bad it has been, we have continued to overcome and rise. And it looks like it may get worse before it gets better, but without hope, there is no hope. Yeah, we have to keep hope alive. And so those are the projects that I'm working on. In terms of books, I'm hoping to submit a few other poems to, or project kind of ideas to Sterling Books, Union Square, who published this book, to see if they were interested in it. But I have some projects. So one I've wanted to get out for a few years, but it's more of an environmentally oriented poem, and it's about, it's called Where the Hum Begins, and it's more about things, places and things in our environment, because I really feel it's important to honor our place and wherever we live. I don't know whether you know this book called The Yellow House that was popular last year. It's by a New Orleans writer. I can't think of her name at the moment, but it was about her going back after Katrina and finding her home, her family's home, and restoring it, and about all of the memories and associations that she had with that place. And so I did a poetry writing workshop on, writing about our place and our thing. And I think we still, I've been into this genealogical project for many years as well. So those are interests of mine. And those are things that I continue to feel that I'm going to work on. I'm going to work on more historical narratives. I have a lot about, just if something happens, it's just like I use this example, which is a non-Black example, but the Midnight Ride of Paul Revere. Look how important that was as students, young people, we growing up. That was kind of like something that people could remember because it was the style and the model. And so I don't often write in what we would call poetry, formal style, I might dabble in that, sonnets and this and that, but I'm a free verse writer, and I just like to write in the voice of the people. I use the vernacular of the people. I am pleased that I'm able to write poems that have emotional touchstones in them for audiences to read. I think a lot of people, my one book that I wrote, it's been out about 12 years now, called Black Street. And that's the way that poem begins. I live on Black Street, you know, and that's what I represent. And I don't try to emulate other styles and other approved ways of doing things. You know, I feel I have the right. I take two freedoms. I write what I feel or I'm inspired to write, and I also I recently give a little talk on. I write in the voice of we, you know, and I feel that my community has given me permission to speak in its behalf. And so when I begin a line with we, I feel that you know, I feel like I'm speaking on behalf of everybody who embraces what it is that I'm talking about, but mostly I have dedicated myself to speaking on behalf of my folk.
Do you have any words of wisdom for seniors who are, you know, still trying to, you know, make a push and do these projects and things that they always dreamed of doing, but may not have, you know, brought to fruition yet?
Well, I think that my first thing is I wrote this poem 18 years ago and had no idea that it would ever come to where it is now. I mean, just the fact that it was online and available, and every year for our Juneteenth, I could go downtown and read it at our event. I never had any idea that it would go beyond that, where it has already been. And to have, like for me, a national book, an international book, which is what I'm saying it is now because the company has promoted it all over. It never occurred to me that this would actually come to fruition, even though I still had books that I thought I would like to get out there. I always thought they'd be self-published or, you know, a little publishing company. I never thought I would be involved in anything of this magnitude. And so that's, to me, that's a testimony to the idea of keep hope alive, keep striving. You know, Emily Dickinson said when she, I forget which poem it is, but she ends it with when she would still be trying to thank people with her granite lips, meaning that after she buried, her lips would be still curled into her thank you. And so because we often never get all of those things done, but we're still trying. You know, we're still striving, even to our last breath. We're still striving and still hoping and keeping hope alive. So that's the thing I say is don't give up hope. Just keep working toward you know, I'm inspired by authors who are published at an older age. And that's been some of the inspiration for me. Some of the people who I admire most didn't get their first book published until they were 50, in their 50s or even 60s, and won prizes for them. So
we actually have a Sojourner Truth African Heritage Museum here in town. So how did you come by your name?
Okay, well, my name, I guess it's one of those things that came to me. And so I went to school in Berkeley. I was in Berkeley, and I think ever since I've been in high school, my given name is so it's a gentle name, I would say that. Okay. And I always in my mind thought, I want a name that is strong like a rock. And I always thought I would change my name to something because I didn't want to be called my birth name when I got to be an older woman, Miss, I'm hesitating to say my name now, even though a lot of people know my name, my first name. And I made Sojourner my second name. And when I decided that, and I was going through all the stress of grad school and stuff, but I just decided one night, overnight, I'm going to change my name to Sojourner. And I called my mother, who lived in North Carolina, the very first thing as soon as I woke up, and said, Mommy, this is what I'm going to do. I'm not going to get rid of my first name, but I'm going to add Sojourner. And she said, well, that's fine. She said, if I had thought about it, I would have named you that. And she told me that when she was in high school, last year in high school, and in North Carolina, in many states, maybe they did, they used to have Negro History Week. And her history teacher said you can be anybody in history. You can choose to be in the skit anybody you want to, and she chose to be Sojourner Truth.
Wow.
Now, I don't know whether she'd ever told me that as I was, growing up, because I was raised by my grandmother. So I said, Mommy, write me that story. So she wrote me that story, and not only did she do that, when my mother passed away and I got her Bible, in the Bible, she had put a little red insert mark, and put Sojourner, added Sojourner to my name. So when people ask me, did your mother give you that name? I say yes, because as soon as I told her that was my desire, she approved it and then added the name to the Bible. And that was in around the early 80s when I did this. And so then about Sojourner Truth, there would be in the books, there would not be much about her. They would say, people like Harriet Tubman and Sojourner Truth. But if you looked in the index, there was only one little page, and usually that's what the page said, people like Harriet Tubman or Sojourner Truth, but they never told anything about them. So I started, I know you can edit this if it gets too long. I started learning about Sojourner Truth, and I did a talk about her in Berkeley. And I didn't even know that I knew so much. I think they thought it was going to be about a 45-minute talk, and it went about 2 hours. And some people left, but most of the people stayed, you know what I mean? So I started to do more stuff with Sojourner Truth, learn as much as I could, read all the different little biographies that there were of her and stuff. And in 1996, when they named the Mars rover, 1995, they named the first rover that was going to Mars after Sojourner Truth, because they'd done a kids contest, and this young Black girl from Connecticut had submitted that name, Sojourner Truth, because she said Sojourner meant traveler. They chose that for the Mars rover. And so then I went on a full-time tour. I toured all up and down the West Coast, all the way to Seattle, all different places, telling the story of, and I wrote to NASA, and they sent me a video that I would use in my presentation, and I had all this collected books and stuff. So I just went up and down talking about Sojourner Truth, telling her story. And then after about 10 years, I said, I'm going to give Sojourner Truth is so powerful, so big, and people are starting to identify me with her, et cetera. I'm going to give the name back. But after I thought about it a while, I said, I'm a representative. I'm a representative for the name of Sojourner Truth, for the spirit. And now she's just, look at her, how her history, how her legacy, what she represents has exploded all over the country.